One of the problems too, church, with us, the soil very much has to do with the heart. And I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes it's hard to get a solid read on the heart. Sometimes I get stuck looking at the outside. Sometimes I get stuck judging people with my eyes when I should not be judging them with my eyes, but I should pray the prayer of Samuel for God, help me to see people the way that you see them. My job is to scatter the seed. My job is to sow the seed. And so in that sense, we should have an urgency today, as much as we should have had yesterday, and we should have an urgency this year as much as we should have had last year and the year before, to spread the seed, the Word of God. Verse 12, let's get into some of the specifics and talk about them that we see in this parable as it's laid out. Verse 12, the ones along the path are those who have heard, and the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. Now, I see that in several individuals that Jesus deals with. Again, just looking at Luke 7 and 8 for now. In Luke chapter 7 and Luke chapter 8, there are those that Jesus puts the seed in, Simon, I think, being among them, several others that would fall into the camp of being Pharisees and religious leaders of the day. They are exposed to Jesus. They hear Jesus' teaching from his own lips and perhaps even witness some of his miracles with their own eyes. But that seed, the Word of God, never penetrates the heart. They never accept it. They never believe that Jesus is who he says he is. Simon, even as he sits at the table of Jesus, as he's invited him in the house, as Jesus is engaging with him, he doubts that Jesus is even a prophet. And by the way, just a few verses before that in John chapter 7, Jesus makes the claim to John's two disciples that I am greater than a prophet. I'm not just a prophet, I am greater than a prophet. But nonetheless, we see examples right here in the context of Luke chapter 7 and chapter 8 where there are those who are exposed to the Word of God, but they do not receive or believe the Word. They see it, they hear it, but they don't believe it, and therefore it does not benefit them. They don't allow it to benefit them. Verse 13, and the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the Word, they receive it with joy. But these have no root, for they believe for a while, and in time of testing, they fall away. Now, as I'm laying this out as well, I don't think as we consider, there's two things for us to consider as we study this parable. One is from the perspective of the sower, to have that urgency to go out and to sow the Word of God. That's one thing that we should look at this parable, one perspective we should understand it from. But the second one is equally important, especially as it pertains to urgency, and that is, as we read this as a parable of the soils, we need to be evaluating as we read through this the type of soil that we have in our hearts towards the Word of God. And likely for many of those who are here this morning, most of us, I would venture to say, would not find ourselves in a place where we would identify with this first type of soil that we find in verse 12. But as we move through these soils, we want to have a time of evaluation of ourselves. We want to take time to look and examine ourselves and ensure that if our soil of our heart is not what it should be towards the Word of God, then it's time to stir things up. It's time to get the rocks out. It's time to till the soil. It's time to plow. It's time to get rid of the junk. And it's time to make ourselves, position ourselves, train ourselves to have a high sensitivity and receptivity to the Word of God. It's too easy for us sometimes to become callous towards the Word of God. It's too easy for us sometimes to become desensitized to the Word of God. For us to become so familiar with it that we don't allow it to be transformational for us anymore. To allow ourselves to become disillusioned as we look at perhaps others that we see or have looked at, and we see the way that they engage with it or live their lives, and we say, man, well, as long as I'm doing better than so-and-so, I'm going to be content with that. It is so critical for us, church, not only to have an urgency of spreading the seed, but an urgency about conditioning our own heart and our own receptivity, about managing our soil to make sure we are always receptive to the Word of God. Even when the Word of God would rebuke us, even when the Word of God would correct us, even when the Word of God would call us to go a direction that we did not see ourselves going, or maybe we didn't even want to go, but we are receptive to the point that where God leads us, we will follow. So important for us, church, to realize this and have an urgency, not something we want to put off for another day or a week or next month or after my birthday or once the Patriots win the Super Bowl. It's not something that we want to put off, but we should have an urgency today to make ourselves more receptive. We don't want the danger of missing the opportunity for the Word of God to work richly in our lives. We don't want to miss an opportunity for the Word of God to produce fruit in us. We don't want to miss an opportunity for the Word of God to penetrate not only our lives in the most valuable, fruitful way, but as a consequence of letting God do that in our life, we know it will be a blessing to our spouse. We know it will be a blessing to our children. We know it will be a blessing to our grandchildren, our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends. On it goes, church. By us having more receptive soul towards the Word of God and letting it penetrate deeply in our lives, we allow it to proliferate and produce fruit. We need to have an urgency about tilling the soil and turning things upside down in our life if we have not been receptive to the Word of God. But nonetheless, he speaks in verse 13 about the one